All right, you guys, welcome back to another episode of Coach's Corner. Today we are talking with Heather Pappas about body aches and pain. Can it be fixed with corrective movement? So that's the topic of the day. Heather is our special guest today. I want to talk to you a little bit about Heather. Heather is actually one of two physical therapists in Louisville that works with Premise Health to serve the Humana population. So Heather works with a lot of different Humana associates. She's actually housed within the Health and Wellbeing Center of Hum Tower. So the position includes really one-on-one patient care, collaborative projects such as this with Humana vendors, and associate education. So just a little bit about Heather. Heather has had a lifelong fascination surrounding just really optimizing human movement and function, which drives her passion to efficiently achieve ideal patient outcomes. So in the last 5 years, she's had a plethora of knowledge gained as she's obtained a broad range of certifications while working across tons of disciplinary teams. She's addressed really a wide range of clientele and aspects, from pain science to breath management, from dry needling. So you really have an expert in your presence today. So welcome, Heather.
Hey, thanks for having me. I was really excited when you reached out.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we start off all Coach's Corners, I see familiar faces on the call. You guys know that this is super informal. I don't want it to be formal. Like, we get enough of that in our everyday, like 8 to 5, 9 to 5 work. This isn't formal. This is chit chat. So if you got a question, drop it in the chat, or more so, talk to me. Like, please come off mute, say what you need to say, ask Heather any question. Nothing's off limits, because we're pretty open here. But you guys know how Coach's Corner starts. We always start with rapid fire questions. So Heather, we're going to get about 10 questions that we're going to ask just for your knowledge. I don't have this written down, so I'm just going rapid as well as you are. So really, we're looking 1 word to 2 word answers, no ums, no thinking about it, top of mind. Are you ready?
Probably not, but let's do it.
All right, here we go. Middle name?
Nicole.
Favorite color?
Blue.
Tacos or pizza?
Tacos.
Coffee order?
Americano.
Chocolate or sweet, or like candy?
Dark chocolate, the bitter stuff.
Favorite exercise?
Deadlift.
Favorite hobby?
Hiking.
Favorite sport?
Basketball.
Favorite book?
The Tattoos of Auschwitz.
Oh man, that's serious.
Yeah.
Lucky Charms or Captain Crunch?
Captain Crunch, peanut butter only.
Pop-Tarts or toaster strudel? Final question.
Toaster strudel.
There we go. Very nice job. Well done. Those have nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today, but they're super fun to do. So again, guys, our topic, body aches and pain. We brought in the big guns for this one. Can it be fixed with corrective movement? So where I want to start, Heather, is just, I think there's a lot of misconception around aches and pain. Like, can you elaborate from more of a scientific standpoint, actually, on what is the difference between, an ache, a soreness versus actual pain that someone will experience?
Yeah. And, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Even sometimes, like my coworkers, they're like, is this something I need to have treated? Do I just let it go? But I definitely like to say, soreness is something that typically happens when you've done a new activity. When you're getting out in the garden again, you're having that first hike or bike ride of the season, you get a little bit sore, you get a little bit achy. It usually goes away 24 to 48 hours, and you're often going to retain like your normal strength, right? It's not going to change your mobility. You might be a little bit less flexible, but nothing really changes outside of that little bit of low level discomfort. When it comes to pain, this can happen during or after doing movement. It typically is going to gradually worsen over time. And that could be higher intensity symptoms, or it could be, hey, it starts to spread, right? So it popped up initially in this one isolated spot, and now we start to see it trickle into other body parts. And then it's usually going to be associated with some sort of weakness, loss of motion, or you might find yourself avoiding certain activities because you know that they're consistently problematic. That's when we really cross that border into pain.
So when, it's in our title, can it be fixed with corrective movement? A lot of we in this profession, we say that term all the time, corrective movement. Like, I know you probably say it 1,000 times a day. We say it too, but people that aren't in this industry, let's just be plain and simple, they don't know what the hell we're talking about. So can you elaborate a little bit on what is corrective movement and just what is it?
Yeah. So a lot of times, we are constantly looking at the way people move. You guys might be looking at weightlifting patterns, specifically squats, deadlifts, those sorts of things. On a base level, I'm watching people walk. My husband thinks it's a game to point out people in public and ask me what's wrong with them based on the way that they're walking. And at first it was kind of fun. Now I'm like, okay, I do it all day. But you can glean some ideas of what might be the problematic tissue based on the way that someone's moving. So you may look at a squat and you see that someone's trunk comes forward really far. That could happen for 7 different reasons. And then our goal is to kind of break that down. And then the corrective movement is something that we can do that's going to help you squat without your trunk falling forward so much. What can we do that maybe strengthens your hip, maybe improves your ankle range of motion, maybe gives you more core stability? So we might address 1 or 2 things at a time, use a corrective movement and see how it changes that squat without just practicing squats and telling you to do better.
And I think that's the biggest misconception, right? Is there may be pain in one area, or there may be limitation in a certain area. The problem is usually not that area. It's stemming from another problem that is causing. So what I think many may not understand is really in the body, it's a cause and effect consistently. There's a cause. Your traps may be overactive. So what the effect is there is you have a lot of neck pain, and you may have chronic headaches here, things like that. But the cause of that is that your traps are overactive, right? This is what I mean by traps. Is here is always tense, or you carry a lot of stress here, or you're sleeping on your side like this. So this is always active for 8 hours. And so this is always overactive. So it's causing what the cause is from overactive traps. The effect is neck pain. And yes. I think that's what we try to implement when we say corrective movement. So when we have to correct that, now we got to correct your traps. But how do we do that? So let me ask you this. Can pain, can soreness be fixed? How do we do that?
Absolutely, both can be fixed. And it doesn't always take a professional. So sometimes it can be, hey, this thing's sore, I'm going to stretch it, and I'm going to strengthen the opposite thing, right? So traps, I want to stretch my trap. Upper trap is usually what we're referring to when we say traps in general. And then we want to strengthen our lower trap, right? So we want to loosen this, strengthen the opposite. And a lot of times that's going to help. Whether or not it completely resolves is also part of that decision making on, is this a soreness or is this a pain? A lot of times those pains are going to linger. But you hit on a big one too, headaches. I see so many times people have headaches and they want to take Advil. They might have been on migraine medication even for long periods of time. and they walk in the door here, and I'm like looking at their neck, I'm looking between their shoulder blades, maybe even a little bit further down, and they're like, whoa, 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 like I said it was my head. I'm like, yeah, I know. Like there's a lot of pain referral patterns in the body. And even just when somebody walks in the door with this pinpoint front of the shoulder pain, I'm looking at their neck. I'm looking at their shoulder, of course, because that's where they have it. I'm looking at their shoulder blade. I'm looking at the muscles around the shoulder blade. I'm looking at thoracic spine. And then there are a minimum of 12 muscles that I can think of off the top of my head that send pain right here if you look at pain referral patterns. Yeah. So there's a lot to tease out on why, but corrective movements, if they weren't effective, I would not have a job, and your guys' job would be a little bit more limited.
Yeah, so talk to me about this in layman's terms as much as you can. What are pain patterns? Like, I've heard you mention it multiple times.
Yes.
I think that's something that some may struggle with. Like, I get it, I'm in the industry, but like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So on a base level, to start with, there were a couple of scientists that one actually was a cardiac surgeon, and she realized that if there was a trigger point in a certain muscle along the chest, it led to a consistent cardiac problem that she saw. And she could treat this cardiac problem by working on a muscle of the chest, which like was revolutionary at that time. She and another researcher went in and they injected different muscles of the body and with like lidocaine or things like that. And then they just asked people, where do you feel this? And over time, they drew maps. So they injected, we'll say 1,000 biceps. And then they just asked people, where do you feel this at? And different people felt it in different areas. And so they have, you know, a more densely populated area. And we now have these maps that we can refer to that show us where might these symptoms be coming from. And they give us a starting point. They're not perfect. I absolutely have people that their pain is caused by me poking somewhere that isn't on a map. But it's a big help in getting us started as to, like you said, what was the cause of this pain? Because sometimes that's where the muddy water is.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like for, you know, we talked about this a little bit in our call, but there's sometimes where, you know, fitness coaches get asked a lot of questions about the body and about, you know, I'm feeling pain here, what can I do? I'm feeling pain here, what can I do? And it may not be pain at all, it may be soreness. So that was good to distinguish the two. But there are sometimes, guys, like, I'll be honest with you, sometimes those things are out of our scope of practice. However, a lot of it is within, because we practice corrective exercise. But Heather, when would you say, like, for our clients, when is it time for them to, like, if they're experiencing pain and things like that, and they're working with coaches, but when do you feel like it's time to go see a physical therapist?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that's a line that's difficult for a lot of people. I find a lot of people haven't seen me until they've had this problem for 2 years already. And I'm like, okay, well, now we have a lot more work to do, right? So it is nice if you see us a little bit earlier. Well, not a little bit, quite a bit earlier than 2 years. But I would say, you know, if you've had symptoms for 2 to 3 weeks and it seems like they're getting progressively more intense, or you're finding that you have them more often throughout the day, or they start lingering longer and longer after a movement, or even a position. So some people will be stuck in the same position all day with work, especially with so many people working from home now. You're stuck in these postures all day, and that can contribute. So you might notice that you start to get some swelling. You might notice numbness or tingling. Those are probably signs that you need to have a little bit deeper evaluation.
What I want to know is who on here just adjusted their posture, because I did.
That is so natural.
Yeah, I noticed that mine is, you know, those overactive traps I mentioned earlier, that was me. So, you know, everybody has those things. I do want to mention one thing that's very interesting that a lot of people might not know. about the state of Kentucky. Can you talk about true direct access and what that means?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Humana has actually been the best client base I've ever seen at utilizing direct access. So most of my patients schedule themselves either through the app, they call us, they just walk in the door, and that's essentially direct access. So in Kentucky, you do not have to go see a physician, a nurse practitioner, physician assistant. Like that step can just be overlooked as long as you don't present to me with red flags. So there is a chance if certain things come up where I'm like, hey, we might need some imaging, we might need to rule out other systems, then I will still send to nurse practitioner, physician, or if you have a primary care, sometimes I can just chat with them to get what we need. But 9 times out of 10, you can start a physical therapy plan of care just with the physical therapist. So come see me. We work through the exercises. We talk about when do you expect to notice a change with this? What types of changes should you be looking for? And if for some reason we're not achieving that, then again, that's a chance where we may need to refer. But in Kentucky, you guys can come see a physical therapist, and not just me. Even if you live on the other side of town and you're working from home, you can see a physical therapist at your own free will, without having to go through anything with getting a referral.
Heather, I'm going to throw this out there to you, and I don't know if you know the answer, and it's okay if you don't, because we didn't talk about this at all, but is there a place that, because we have a lot of people that aren't from Kentucky that are all across the country that tune into this, like, is there a place where they can see by state who has like true direct access?
Yes. If you enter in like direct access physical therapy in a search engine, I try not to say Google it, right? But definitely just looking in the search engine for direct access. There are quite a few states that have direct access now. And some of that also applies to the telehealth sector now. So that's starting to build in physical therapy. But yes, I'm glad you brought in the people that aren't in Kentucky, because there are a lot of places where you may be able to be seen for an entire plan of care, which is what true direct access is in Kentucky. Whereas other places you can start with a physical therapist, but maybe they only have a month to see you. And if you're not completely healed, then they have to refer legally. So there are restricted states, and then there are states that are like, heck no, we don't want a PT seeing someone first.
And which is amazing, right? For Kentucky to have true direct access. Like, I don't think people know how big that is, because here's the thing. You don't have to go to your primary care physician with shoulder pain and then them take x-rays. And it has nothing to do with the bone at all. It's going to be every muscle, ligament, tendon, but then you have x-rays. What do you need x-rays for? And then they're going to refer you to a PT. So it really eliminates the hassle. So it's absolutely huge. When we talked about that, like it's a big move. But let's get back to the topic. I just wanted to let people know that does exist. We're in a sector that, maybe not the fitness industry, but Humana associates that are often in a lot of meetings, on their computers a lot, day in and day out, on the phone a lot. What are some areas of the body that you consistently see people struggle with? And it doesn't have to just be Humana associates. It can be the entire population.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, you already hit it nail on the head earlier, neck pain. Sometimes it's from the traps, sometimes it's from other things. But neck pain, shoulder pain, headaches, those are kind of all clustered together because a lot of times they have similar causes. And I find that simply just getting out of midline is helpful, because how many of us, not only are we on the computer all day with work, but then maybe we go home and we spend an hour with the family watching TV. We might, do all of these other things where we're always stuck in midline. And so one of the biggest things is just get out of it, right? You can tilt side to side, you can turn side to side, you can look up, you can look down. Like, we have so many other movements to utilize. And I would argue, honestly, we talked about correcting posture earlier. Even if you're in the perfect posture, if you do that all day, every day, your body is not going to like that. Our bodies were made to move, and movement out of the same position all day, no matter what that position is going to be much, much more beneficial. I would say the number 2 area is going to be low back hip. And that's again, because we are on our rear ends a large part of the day. Whether it's at computers, whether it's just because we tend not to move as a society, we get stuck in that flex posture and everything gets tight on one side and it gets underactive on the other, just like what you were talking about with the shoulders. And literally just starting a walking program can help so many people with back pain. The watches have helped a lot of people realize they might only get 1,000 steps a day, right? And if you look at guidelines, in theory, you should be getting 10,000. Well, that's a huge jump, right? So I definitely don't want anybody making that sort of jump because that's going to make you sore. It's probably going to lead to pain. But getting up and taking a 10-minute walk with your family right before bed can be a great start.
Yeah, we have a question from in the chat, and it's a good one because I'll go ahead and say I've never had back pain in my life, right? And I've worked with a ton of clients that just consistently have back pain.
Yeah.
I never knew how it felt, right? And now I'm so empathetic to those individuals because prior to COVID, in the fitness facility at Well, like I would average 15,000 steps a day, and that was averaging. When we went to work at home, I was doing all digital stuff. So I was sitting, and now 2 years later, I have back pain and I cannot get rid of it to save my life. And like, it is a feeling that is always there, no matter, like, I'm doing the exercises, but I got to call myself out. Am I really doing the exercises? I may do them like once every 2 weeks. Like, that's not going to help, right? So the question that we have is, are there any stretches, movements you would recommend for a quick release for low back pain from sitting all day?
Yeah. So essentially, as long as it's not painful, getting into literally the opposite position. So when we sit, we're flex. I want you to get up and come back into the opposite position. That's going to be something that most people are comfortable with. If for any reason it feels like it might throw you off balance, you get any sort of discomfort, I am a huge proponent of tummy time. Lay on the floor, lay on your bed, whatever it is, get on your belly, because we are so stuck in that flexed position that just getting onto your belly is going to help feel better.
And like a quick release, like anything that's holding to in front of you with like extension, flexion, where it's moving in and out from a comfortable pattern is going to get those hips like not this. They're going to be able to do this.
You got it.
So again, like it comes back to, like you said, the perfect posture, right? That's not perfect either because you're stuck. What we don't want is you to be stuck in a position of flexion or extension. We want you to be able to fluidly move through that. And like, what this brings me to is as we age, right? Like if you've ever seen a baby squat, it is beautiful. They can just drop it like it's hot down there and there is nothing. They are good to go. It's beautiful. It's perfect. And then as we get a little older and a little older, it gets a little worse and a little worse and a little worse. And I think, Heather, something you said to me in our call was like, some of that's okay. That's age. That's you've lived. You're not like this toddler anymore that like has no stuck patterns, has no, has not lived at all. We're going to have that. But I think more, I hear like even my mom has said to me, which I used to like do max load training where like I'm coming close to my maximum lifts and everything. She's like, do you really need to lift that heavy as you age? Do you really need to still train 5 days a week instead of 3? Like, you're not in your early 20s, you're not in your mid 20s, you're not in your early 30s. Like, do you still need to train like that? And it's funny to me because that's what society thinks. Like, we need to dial it back in as we age. And it's actually the exact opposite. Like, you need to continue moving, like more activity as you're aging, not less activity because you are aging. Like, it's the exact opposite of what most people think. And like becoming sedentary is one of the worst things that you can do, right? So like, what would you say to those individuals?
So I also get that feedback.
Yeah.
I get asked why I train like a man. And I'm like, well, I've trained like this for a long time now. And maybe you think I do, but I don't think I look like a man, right? So step one is like, don't be concerned about, the fears that people have, because a lot of us are misinformed. And, I've kind of passed that peak where I should be gaining strength. I should be on that decline. And I'm still finding that some of my lifts are getting stronger.
Yeah.
As I'm learning more and more about nutrition, as I'm learning more and more about the correct programming, as I've done these corrective exercises to fix my imbalances. And when you fix those imbalances, what happens is your brain body connection improves and you get a quick jump in strength and power. So you find that a lot of times once you've completed these correctives, you're stronger that day. And a lot of that comes from how our brain reacts to movement. And I think, it's important to me, first of all, to age gracefully. That is why I try to partake in a healthy lifestyle. That's why I try to always improve. Because when I was in Ohio, most of my population was over the age of 75. And I'm talking like 70 to 75% of them. I had people in their hundreds, not just one or two. And like these people were old, right? And they wanted to still do fun things. I had one guy that wanted to practice jumping. Like he has no real need to jump, but he wants to.
Exactly.
And working on that though helped him with getting up and down his basement stairs safely, because we improved the power of the involved muscles. And, I had a 95-year-old lady that wanted to get back to dancing. We deadlifted, granted with a kettlebell, but we deadlifted. And to her, again, that was very functional, because right after her back surgery, she struggled to get up off the toilet when she was out in public. And that's embarrassing. Nobody wants to deal with that. I sure as heck do not want to be a 75-year-old lady and have someone come pick me off the toilet in public. So I think that's why moving now is really, really important. And it doesn't have to be strength training, guys. So if strength training is intimidating, just because that's what Dana and I love does not mean that that's the route you need to go. Movement in general is going to help with strength and mobility and generally feeling well.
Yeah, and I think what I've learned over time too is that, I used to strength train for so long, and it's such a strict movement. It's such a power-based movement. You're controlled, you're tight everywhere. And that wasn't great either. Like I was stiff, my mobility wasn't great. So I started to fix that. Like I did this with one of our yoga instructors. We just like traded services, and I did private lessons with her where it's weird. It's almost like interpretive movement. So it's literally like, it's pretty weird, guys, but I'd still do it in my living room. And it's just like with one breath, you have to move, and with the exhale, you have to reach. That's it. And it's like fluid movement. And I'll do that sometimes like about right before I go to bed. It's like, I'll do it for one song. I'll put like some indie on or something like that and do it for 3 minutes. And my movement and my sleep have improved so much. You might look like a weirdo in your living room, but I promise, like my mobility I feel fantastic with that. So it's just increasing movement and range of motion. But Eric asked a good question. I think this is a very multifaceted question as well as a difficult one. So of course, Heather, I'm going to give it to you first. Is there a quote unquote roadmap or chart that shows corrective movement options based on the pain area that you're experiencing? Like, is there a self-analysis chart? Which self-analysis can get very dangerous because you don't have that education. I mean, it would
not only not having the education, you cannot be objective about your own body.
Yeah.
When I have something wrong, I go to a PT, maybe a chiropractor, right? Yeah. I've gone to acupuncturists. I cannot solve my own problems. And I, in theory, should have the knowledge, right? But I go see other professionals when I have something wrong.
Yeah.
I try, you know, for like I told you guys, a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, if I can manage it, if I can maybe have my husband, you know, work on a certain joint or Graston something for me, I might try to band-aid it and then I'll do my correctives. But you cannot be objective about your own body. So it's absolutely a slippery slope. However, I think that there are more charts based on what your movement pattern is. So I don't know that there's one specifically based on pain. I can look. But as far as, you know, if when you squat, your knees come inward, here are reasons that that might happen. It may help your discomfort, your pain in correcting the knees coming inward. But in some people, if you're under a high load and you're really athletic, your knees coming inward for a short period of time during that squat might actually be a good thing. They're showing that some of our Olympic lifters bring their knees in and right back out, but they do it quickly and they do it controlled. Yeah. And that's actually a good thing. So some of these faulty movement patterns are actually really adaptive. So it's tough, but there are charts that will say, you know, here's a few things that you can fix if this is how you squat. And essentially that's taking a video of yourself doing it and watching how it looks. But I agree with Dana, it's kind of a slippery slope and it's tough to manage on your own.
I would say one thing you can do though, like I would say one, I'm with Heather on this. Any issues that I have, I go to people outside of me that I trust and in their profession. Even if I needed correctives that I know how to do, but I still had pain, like I would go to a PT. I have a body specialist that I go to. I would go to a chiropractor, things like that. Obviously one that you can trust, but what the biggest piece of advice I would say is prepare yourself to be able to verbally and accurately explain what is happening to that professional. Because like if you just come in and say my shoulder hurts, it gives them no real indication of where it's stemming from. If you come prepared with knowing what is happening with your body and being able to self-analyze the feelings that you feel within your body, where is pain coming from? Is it an ache? Is it sudden? Is it a burst? If this happens, do you go numb? That gives the professional more indication, more clues on how to solve for the problem. So that's the biggest thing I would say in self-analyzing is like understand the pain and understand cause and effect, and being able to verbally explain what's happening is usually pretty helpful. And you don't feel like, you know, your doctor's appointment was a waste, right? Tammy asked, Heather, do you recommend cupping?
Yes. So I actually perform cupping on some of my patients. I think like any other intervention, it is appropriate when utilized under the right circumstances. So everything that I do is kind of like a mechanic having their toolbox, right? Like I use cupping, maybe that's my wrench. Maybe dry needling is my socket, right? So like I have different interventions that are different tools, and that's where correctives are a huge part of what I do. And it's probably like my go-to multi-tool, but I also have the other tools. I have the manual techniques. I have, you know, some version of Graston, A-stem, whatever you want to call it, that soft tissue work. And then, you know, cupping. And I think cupping is great. I think that in some ways it got some hype because of the Olympics. Kind of like kinesio tape. We saw this like huge uptake in kinesio tape when people wore it during the, gosh, I don't even know which Olympics, a couple ago.
I think it was Rio.
Yeah, Rio, you're right.
Rio. Yeah.
And so then, you know, everybody saw the swimmers with their marks from the cupping and it got really popular again. So that happens, things wax and wane, but cupping has been used for a long time. And I think, again, when you pick the right patient and the right pain presentation, it is a phenomenal intervention.
I think it's exactly what you said, Heather. It's one of those things in the toolboxes like that can help But I think ultimately to get rid of that pain, you have to correct the movement pattern. And I want to talk about that because we're coming up on time, but like a lot of people don't understand what a movement pattern is. Like, and I'm going to make it really simple. Like, think about the side of a volcano, right? And lava is going down the side of the volcano. So a certain way that I walk, right? Have you ever seen somebody's shoes? Like, have you ever looked at someone's shoes and either like the outside of the shoe is like the heel is rubbed completely off, or their feet cave in like this and you could see it, or they're like, they walk out like this. That's a movement pattern, right? That's how they move effortlessly without thinking about it, without correcting it. That is their movement pattern. So think about that time after time, step after step after step. It is basically like lava coming down the side of a volcano and making an imprint in your brain, telling your muscles to step this way, because our brain, our central nervous system controls everything that we do, right? So for me to flex this, my mind has to say muscle contract, because muscles are dumb. They don't know anything. They just know how to extend, shorten, and that's it. The brain tells it what to do. So those movement patterns over time can cause pain in other areas. So can you talk, Heather, about how do you correct movement patterns that, hell, you've been doing for 20 years? That's hard. How do you do that?
Well, I think the biggest one and why leading back to self-analysis is difficult. If you know that you've always walked with your toes out, I'm not always going to correct that.
Yeah.
And I may not need to, because that may be a functional movement pattern for you. Maybe your hips, the bones, like where your leg bone comes into the joint, might be at a different angle than the person next to you. And that's going to mean that you have to walk with a little bit of toe out, because if you walk with toe in, you're going to get this constant pounding of the hip joint.
Yes.
So that's where it's art and science kind of mixed together. And we have science to tell us that, hey, most people who walk this way have problems. We should consider fixing it. But the art tells us, hey, there's this other factor that means maybe we should leave that one alone. But I do think that part of the reason that these movement patterns are propagated is because we've had some sort of impairment for a long time. And there are times where patients are like, well, what caused this? You're telling me that I have some weakness in the muscles. You're telling me that I have stiffness in the joints. Like, what caused what? And sometimes I'm like, it's a chicken or egg thing at this point. Like, it has happened for so long now that unless I met you 15 years ago, I can't really tell you why. All I can tell you is we're going to address some of these funky movement patterns and try to make them look better and see how you feel as we clean them up. So it takes a slow, consistent process, and that's where home exercises and consistent warm-up cool down comes into play, because you have to, like you said, the brain controls everything. We have to repattern the brain before we can repattern the body. Yeah. We have to teach your brain now that this raising my arm has been painful for 6 months, right? Even if I can raise your arm and you not have pain, we have to now do that repetitively for your brain to be like, oh yeah, that's not painful. I can raise my arm, right? And so it becomes this matter of habit and getting you into a new, more appropriate habit.
That's a beautiful explanation. I could talk for days about this. And here's where I fall short. Here's where, like, guys, I just suck and I don't fix my movement patterns. And it's because exactly what Heather said, like warm up and cool down. Let's put your correctives in those so you can get some work on a consistent basis. When PTs send you home, you're done with meeting with them 2 times a week. They send you with home exercises. Like, you got to do them for it to work. And that's my biggest problem. I will be like, okay, this is my correctives. This is, I have low back pain. Here's what I need to do in my warm up and my cool down. And then I get there and then I just don't do it. And I know that sounds like, why is she even calling that out? Like, duh, you have to do it. But seriously, like, that's where a lot of us fail, is like, we have the tools, but like, we have to implement those on a consistent basis, because we're creating a new pathway in the brain to compensate for our old pathway that was instilled for 15 years, right? So like, it has to be consistent. So another question we have before we
touch
wrap
on
up
that real quick before we move on?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the biggest things is making it more manageable and having some level of accountability. So if you're not accountable to yourself and you know that, it can be telling your spouse that you guys aren't going to have a beer after dinner if you haven't done these couple of things. Number two, find ways to fit them in throughout your day. So stop making it, this exercise program is a separate routine. It's something else I have to figure out how to add in. Find ways to do it in your office. Find ways to do it while you're in a meeting. Find ways to incorporate it into the day that you're already having. Sometimes I tell people to do their exercise before they even step foot out of bed in the morning, right? So if I can chop those down, give you 2 to 3 things that are very manageable, you really have no excuse to not do them.
Man, honey to make those. Last question we have here, and we touched on it earlier. How long should we manage pain before seeing a specialist?
I would say at the top end, 4 weeks. If you've had pain for over a month, you're going to start to have other issues, because in the experience of pain, we are going to begin to have some of those muscles shut down, or maybe other types of receptors. If you're having hip or low back pain, we'll find that within 4 weeks, you're going to start to have a balance issue, right? Like, it starts to affect all of your other systems when pain lingers.
Love that. So no, Eric, not 2 years. You got to go before then, but I'm right there with you, brother. I do the same thing. Don't be Dana or Eric, people. Okay. I'll just end with that. Don't be Dana or Eric. Go to the specialist. Remember, it's true direct access. Something special about Humana is we have built a relationship with Heather. So we work with Heather on a consistent basis, where Heather will meet with a client and be working with that patient for quite some time, and then transition them into Well at Humana. That's what we've been working on for a while. And then they can work with a coach directly through personal training until they feel good enough to go on their own, where we have Heather's recommendation and we have your training plan from Heather that we can incorporate in your warm-ups, your cool down. So we'll continue on the road to recovery. So that's something that's really special. But Heather, thank you so much. It has been enlightening and a thrill to talk with you today. I'd love to pick your brain for hours. And we'll look to have you on again. Guys, big news. Our next episode, April 5th, is Misconception in Fitness. Don't be fooled. And big news, we're going podcast all the way. So you will see a huge change for us. We're going where we are recording complete podcast. Eric, where can they find this once we record?
Yeah, so everybody, you can find it. I'll post it up on our Yammer community, the Well at Humana community. But we'll also be up on Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. All the big platforms will have it up there as well. Once we get the video aspect to it as well, we'll probably build that up onto our YouTube channel.
Thanks, Eric. So guys, we're going big time. We're taking it on the road. We are going podcast style. April 5th will be our first episode that we launch from the podcast. We are filming right here at Humana. So can't wait to talk with you guys on April 5th about misconceptions in fitness. Don't be fooled. Heather, thank you again. And you guys have a great day.
Hi, guys. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah.